audiences of all sorts. They might be anywhere from collaborators to the general public to funders, teams, anybody. And generally, the way we do this is that we create various communication products, and they really kind of sort out into two categories: talks and then visuals. And no matter what our specific purpose is, our fundamental goal is to get our audience to understand our content, right? Without that, nothing else is going to happen. And so the question is, do they understand the content? And funny thing about that, the answer to that question has less to do with who the audience is and less to do with what's actually the content in the communication product, and way more to do with how those products are created. So let's ask a different question. How do researchers typically create these products? Well, the typical way for a researcher to create a product, or really anybody, is they think about their research and how it's beautiful, voluminous, complicated glory, and then they decide, our instincts are that we want to stick as much of that information as we can into our talk, let's say. And we can do this through PowerPoint slides full of bullet points and text, and maybe figures too, and tables. And if we are running out of time, we just go faster so we can try to jam it all in. And we assume, or we at least hope, that our audience, by hearing all of this information, will automatically put it together, make meaning out of it, and understand what we understand. And of course, unfortunately, that is not how understanding works. If you think of things from an audience's point of view, understanding happens when they take and examine sort of every little piece of information, and they put it together with what they already know and what's coming in real time. And this is a process that actually takes a lot of energy and time. It's called learning. And learning requires that the audience pay close attention, process all that information, and then put it together to come up with some full picture of understanding. And, a smart audience can do that for a while. But at some point, the flow of information that's coming at them outpaces their ability to process it. And when that happens, they get overwhelmed and they feel confused, and probably they get frustrated. And after some finite time, usually a very small period of time, that means that they stop paying attention. And once they stop paying attention, you can forget about them processing information or understanding. Actually, the talk itself doesn't matter, and the speaker and the content doesn't matter either. So, is there a better way? Is there a way of creating talks and visuals that could actually help the audience do what they need to do to understand the content? Well, that's where I come in. I started my career as a chemist, and then I became a teacher. I taught in community college, where my students, where my course was a prerequisite for students with interests in these sorts of programs. And they needed to take my course and pass it in order to get the jobs that they wanted. And at the time when I started, I pretty much prepared my lessons or lectures the way I've just described and disparaged. And so no big surprise, my students didn't understand very well. They didn't learn, they didn't do well, they became increasingly frustrated. And so in sort of desperation, I turned to the second part of my life and career, and that is that I'm a playwright and I teach playwriting, which means I know quite a bit about story, how it works, And I knew, like you do, that story is very entertaining, that story makes you care, that there's something in story that makes you invest and think about things. But here was my question. Here's something I didn't know. I wondered if story could help an audience learn science. And so what I did is I examined story, and I want to share some of that with you right now. And I want us to take a look at a story, and actually not a story, but instead a genre of story that's pretty well known to everyone, and that is the murder mystery. And in case you've never, ever encountered a murder mystery, let me just review what happens. So in a murder mystery, in the beginning, somebody's dead. And it wasn't an accident. So a person is called in to investigate. That might be a detective or an older lady writer or a priest. And their specific problem is to identify the person who murdered the dead person. And, you know, different things happen, but these are typical things like a weapon might be uncovered, or a witness might come forth, or they might discover a motive for the crime. But in the end, usually all these things come together, and in some fairly exciting scene, the murderer is identified, and in the very end, we get the satisfaction of knowing that person goes to jail. Now, for those people who read murder mysteries or watch murder mysteries, you know that they're actually quite good at getting you to pay attention, process information, and understand the very things we said we want our audience to do. So the question then, my question was, how does story do this? How do they make us pay attention and understand? And when I studied it, I came up with 3 basic tenets or keys, things that story did. And I want to tell you about them right now. So, number 1, story is a journey composed of well-established steps revealed one at a time. These steps are present in nearly every story, and they go like this. The world before, or what happens, you know, at the very beginning of the story. This sort of sets the stage. And then the main character of the story and the specific problem that main character has to deal with. And then actions taken by that main character and the results. And then finally, the big outcome, the final thing, the climax. And then a resolution where we get to see what happened as a result of this story. So that's the story. Now, who goes on this journey? And the answer to that is, of course, the character. The main character is the person that goes on the journey, experiences all these things, takes the action, sees what happens, but they aren't the only one that go on the journey. The audience, once they meet this main character, they identify with them, they step into their shoes, and then they are also in the story, sort of seeing things from that person's perspective and experiencing what they experience. This is called narrative transportation, this sort of magical thing that happens. This makes the character not just somebody in the story in a faraway place, but also sort of stepping between the story and the audience as a guide for the audience. This is the second key I discovered, that stories are journeys of mutual discovery. And the last thing, maybe the most important, is that stories are built around a main question, just like research. So the question goes in that space you've probably been wondering about, like, why is there a gap there? Well, that's where question goes. And the whole first, say, third of the story sets up that main question. And what is the main question in a murder mystery? Who done it, right? It's who done it, the oddest contraction ever. And when does it get answered for the audience? Not right away. at the very end or close to the very end. That means the audience has to wait all that time. They cannot leave if they want to know the answer to that question. And the audience doesn't just kind of wait passively for that. They go with that character and they process those clues with the main character in order to not only kind of keep putting things together, but to go beyond the story itself and predict who that murderer, who committed the murderer. And that area right there, that is really the part that forces people to pay attention, process information, and understand. They're motivated and they're supported in doing this. So 3 keys, I put them together and I incorporated them into my lectures, and my students did markedly better. They were enthused, they were engaged, and they seemed to learn a lot more, and their learning was more robust. Then I worked with Adam, my partner, and we took those keys and we bundled them together into a method that we're calling Storyform science. So in the time that's remaining, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce that method. We're going to show you how we use it to create talks and visuals. And we're going to show you examples of each product. So I'm going to talk about talks. So I'm going to show you how we use Storyform to build short research talks. And we generally have workshops where we have people build short research talks for a general audience. Not because that's the only kind of talk you're ever going to want to do, but if you can use these skills to build a short research talk, then you're going to be able to make a talk of any length for any audience. So in one of our workshops, we call it the lightning workshop, we give the participants a whole pack of cards. And this won't surprise you, I know, but 7 of these cards represent the steps I've just gone through, just showed you the steps of a story. So people use those to create a story-based talk. And they don't start at the beginning when they're building this. They start almost at the end because stories are backwards designed. So that slide is the research outcome success slide. And we ask participants to picture a scene when you got your final results, when you learned something that you really want to talk, the reason they're asking you to talk. Or if you don't have results yet, if you're midstream, picture what you think the scene will look like when you get those results. And then represent a few critical elements of that scene in your mind with icons. Now, why icons? Well, after doing this for years and years, we found that using icons automatically reduces jargon in a talk. And jargon is probably the main enemy of communication. Using icons makes revision and simplification, things that are difficult to do, much easier. And icons, if you want somebody to understand something, you want them to have a certain picture in their heads. Icons help you build that picture in your head to share with the audience. Let me give you some examples of things that people do. This is Kavlia Molugu. She reprograms skin to stem cells. And when she does it, of course, they're all mixed up together in various times of reprogramming. And what she was able to do in her research is identify the skin cells without killing them. Now, we give people a very short period of time. All of this is very time pressured. And we say, in case you're a little worried because you can't draw, don't worry. It's an icon. It's not a Rembrandt. And don't think, just draw. And the amazing thing about this is, even though everybody feels fairly nervous in the first 10 seconds of doing this that it immediately goes away, and they just start drawing like crazy, beautiful, lovely icons. Not that that's important. Only you have to know what the icon represents. Okay, second thing for the card here is stories are built around a question. So the card I just spoke about, that card is the answer. So we need a question, and that's the next card that a participant in our workshop would do. That question needs to be simple, specific, and concrete, and it needs to match the answer. So, for example, this is what Kavlia did, and her question then that would have that as its answer is there a way to identify stem cells without killing them? And of course, the answer is yes, there is. I developed this method. And we give people a short period of time to come up with that question. The next card we would have people do is the main character card, because story has a main character or a guide. And if a person is talking about research and they were the researcher, well, then they are the main character. So that was a case for Kavlia. She was the researcher, and so there's an icon she drew for herself. And then you see on that card, it says, with special powers. What does that mean? Well, you couldn't just pull someone off the street to do your research. You have special powers, like things like skills or knowledge or instrumentation or a role in your lab. And this is what Kavlia drew. She said she was a stem cell engineer. That was her role. She was adept at using CRISPR, and she was also an expert at reprogramming skin to stem cells. And we give people a short period of time to do that. And I'm just going to describe one more slide in any detail at all. And that is, so you have the answer, and you have the question, and the next slide we would have you do is the taking action slide. And in taking action, that's when you show the audience what you did to answer that question and come up with the outcome. And this is pretty much akin to supplying, actions and clues like they would do in a murder mystery. So the cards, we may have people make the cards: first outcome, question, main character, action, world before, world after, and finally specific problems. And then we say, yay, that was the last card, congratulations. And everyone in the workshop goes, what? Because they believe they were making a story-based talk, and there's no story there right now. So the very next step is to take their cards and to reorder them by the numbers in the right corner. And when you do that, you get a story. It goes like this. This sets the stage. This is the big problem your research was done in response to. Oh, there you are, the researcher. This is the specific problem that you decided to work on, you and other people in your lab. This is your specific research question for this part of your research. This is what you did and what happened. This is the final outcome that answers that question. And then this is why the world is a better place since doing that. Then we ask people to partner up, and they deliver their talks to one another using those little cards that they've drawn icons on. So not a text, not a script, but little icons. And then it's time for feedback. The partner gives that speaker, once they deliver their talk, feedback on their talk based on a rubric we have given them. And then once they've gotten feedback, if we have time, we give them time for a little bit of revision. And then we have certain people, brave people of the groups, deliver their talks to everyone so they can get more feedback. But if there's not time for that, then we ask people to leave when they leave, to deliver it to someone who has a very different area than theirs, and get more feedback, and then revise some more, and then deliver, and they get more feedback, sort of underscoring that this is an iterative process. Coming up with any communication product will really demand that you do this sort of thing to make sure you're really communicating something and your audience is really understanding it. So that was about talks. I'm going to hand it off to Adam right now, and he's going to talk about visuals.
Thank you. It was right there a second ago. Hang on. Okay. Now I got it. Good. All right, so let's take a look at using Storyform to create visuals, as Holly said. So you are tasked as a student or as a graduate student or as a faculty or whoever you are in your position to create visuals for whatever you're working on. And that could be a story that you're doing as a journalist, or it could be a poster you're working on as a scientist, or you're creating visuals for your slides, or whatever it happens to be. To some audience, this is very similar to what Holly was talking about. But the thing you need to realize is anytime you do research, and it doesn't matter if you're in high school or an undergraduate or a graduate student or a faculty, you, in the process of doing that research, you become more knowledgeable than the people you're speaking to. It's just the way it works. And so the audience isn't unknowledgeable, they're just less knowledgeable because you've done that work. And so when you start to make visuals to present to that audience, you need to find some visual way to bridge that knowledge gap. And that's what I'm going to try to talk to you about today. So most people, however, don't do that, and they take their more knowledgeable stuff and they put it right in there without doing that visual bridging. And what do you think that does to the things Holly was talking about, where you need your audience to pay attention and engage and process to get them to understand, right? Without bridging that knowledge gap, you lose all of that you're trying to get your audience to do. And so I have the same question that she said, is there a better way? And so let me insert myself into here, because I've been in this position many times like you. I work for scientists all over the world for the last 38 years, right? I help them create visualizations to put into scientific journals or websites or whatever they are working on, grants, papers, anything. For 17 years of that, I actually illustrated major textbooks in the world for university students, right? So undergraduates like yourselves. And the reason that I got that job for so long is because I was making the illustrations for scientific journals, and all the research that goes into a textbook comes out of those journals. And so I needed a way to translate that information for this audience. So I couldn't take things right out of a research journal and put them into a textbook for undergraduates, because those undergraduates wouldn't understand that. And I couldn't ask undergraduates to move up to the level where they would understand what's in a research journal. I had to change and find a way to visually bridge that gap for my audience. And so what I did was the exact same thing Holly was talking about. I incorporate stories into each visualization that I make. And I'm going to show you some of the ways on how to do that today. Doing that allows your audience to get and understand the visuals that you're creating. So again, as Holly said, she found these keys, right? I came along and I helped take those keys and put them into visualization to get audiences to pay attention, engage, process, and then build that understanding. She showed you these cards. We use these cards for visualization also, because they are the way you build a story. The story that you build with these cards is called a story graphic. You can consider it to be an infographic, but an infographic that has a story embedded into it. And so what we have you do is arrange the content of these cards onto, say, an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And you can see that by placing them in a certain order, you can read the story from top to bottom. So here's the cards on a page. Let me insert a story graphic that a student did one time underneath there. This is by Lonnie Van Bank. And I'll remove the card so you can see each part of her story in her story graphic. So right at the top is her world before. Then there's Lonnie right there, where she introduces herself. Here's where she asks her question. This is the specific problem she's going to take on. These are the actions she'll do to answer that question. This is the answer to the question. And then this is why it's a better world when she's all done. So there you can see quickly, easily taking those cards and turning them into a story graphic that anyone, whether Lonnie is there or Lonnie is not there, could understand her research. And we've done this for many, 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 many students over the years. Here's one on imaging the cells in the back of your eye, the retina, in real time. Here's one on storing solar energy and chemical bonds. So the question is, how do you take those icons that you created for your talk that Holly was talking about and move them over to a story graphic? And again, we've made this incredibly simple for you to participate in and understand and actually do. And so here's all your cards. These are cards that were done by Dr. Diggs. I use this method for pediatric doctors all the time. And so the first thing we do is say, hey, take your cards, look at all your cards, and come up with some sort of title that has no jargon in it. That's going to represent the overview of all of these cards. And then we say, okay, let's take that first card, concentrate on those icons, move those over to your story graphic. And then those are not going to function on their own. So you got to add just a tiny bit more to them. Like these three are a process. And so you have to go from one to the next to the next. And then that's still not enough. You're going to have to add just a tiny bit of text to help the audience understand what each of these visuals means. And so there's the text that Dr. Diggs came up with. And then, of course, we need the guide. And so there's you. There's Dr. Diggs's name. She's a doctor, and she's from the Medical College of Wisconsin. And then we just keep doing this with all the cards. You just keep adding them right in. There's your question card that gets moved over. And then the actions that you're going to take get moved over. And then the outcome goes on there. And then the better world at the bottom. It takes minutes to transfer that stuff over, think about it, and create the rough draft of your story graphic. And then just like Holly said with the talks, we got to go to feedback. And so here's a live, not a live, but here's a recorded feedback session, right? We use a different rubric for this one where you actually give it to your partner. They go through it and they tell you what they see on there and what you're trying to represent. And you take notes on what they got right and wrong so that you can go back in and edit it again and do a second draft. People really love these workshops. They enjoy them. They have a lot of good times at them. So here's your rough draft. How do you go from a rough draft to a finished draft story graphic? And what people tell me in workshops is the thing on the right over there is so professional looking. It looks, I can't do that. It's too hard, but it's incredibly easy. Again, we've done the work for you on this process to make your life much easier to understand how it works. So here's Dr. Diggs. She's going to concentrate on that first icon. What we do is we show you how to use the tools in Google image searching. There's tons of tools in there to get the icons and the images that you need quickly, or we have you use BioRender, whichever you prefer. And so she needs children in pain, and she's going to use that same icon over and over again. So there it is, repeated over and over. She needs to show a nurse who's questioning, and there's the questioning nurse, and then she needs to show a nurse who has found the answer or is happy. There's that. You can create this icon right in PowerPoint or Google Slides if you want. It's just a circle with some text in the middle and an arrow and a plus sign. And then she did this research, so she had all of the different pain scales that she was comparing, but you can also Google image search those. So there they are. And then, of course, we make you put your own picture in there and your association. and that's it. Those are the icons. There's 3 Google image searches to find all of these icons, and they came up quickly, and there they are. It did not take long at all. Everything else in the story graphic is from Google Slides or from PowerPoint, whatever you choose to use. Those applications are really good at text, boxes, arrows, check marks, and things like that. And so once you have all of that, you can just put it together and merge the two, and you end up with a finished professional visual that anyone, doesn't matter who they are, can come up and understand the research that you're working on. You can also do this in a poster format. So you could literally just take that story graphic that you created and use it as a center panel in your poster. And then that way you have all your data off to the side if you want to talk to peers about in-depth knowledge and in-depth kind of stuff that a general audience wouldn't understand. So there's one way to do it. Another way is you convert any poster that you currently have into a story graphic. So make the entire poster a story graphic. And you can do that from scratch also, of course, because those same cards are in your every poster. They're in there somewhere. You just have to identify them, right? So there they are. And then you have to arrange them in an order so that the person can go through your poster, right? So here they are in the correct order. And then, of course, you have to try to remove your jargon. So that one main thing, or that title up at the top, right? Instead of perceived egocentric distant measures, it became distant misperception in virtual reality. And then there's the problem, there's the guide, there's the question, the world, and all the other parts. And so you can see that when you make a poster into a story graphic, most of the words go away. They're no longer necessary. So imagine, right, just using a story graphic or having a story graphic on your poster or your entire poster as a story graphic, how easy it would be for anyone to understand that poster, right? Whether you're at a session or if it ends up in the poster graveyard. These are far more easier for anyone to understand. And then Holly talked about short talks and introduced you to the method. We also use this for longer talks. Does not matter if it's a 1-minute talk, a 3-minute talk, a 10-minute talk, a 50-minute talk. It's the same procedure. It's the same story and the same cards. You're just going to expand on different areas of these cards, right? So here's your title slide. Here's your first or opening slide. You're going to start with the world before, introduce yourself. And then slide 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, depends on how in depth you want to get, but a 10-minute talk, about 10 slides, there they are. And so we're teaching you how to do visually rich, interesting things to look at. So if you look at that title slide, these are actual title slides from our students. They tend to be very visual rich. Jargon gets removed. They become very easy to understand. There's one slide that was a question. So literally, are we asking you to make one slide a question? Yes, we are. We're asking you to put that question on a slide all by itself, and then you pause at this point and you read that to the audience. And that sets that question in the mind of the audience so that they are now waiting for those clues, like in the murder mystery, to come in to help answer that question. And that's going to get that engagement that you're looking for. So, data. I keep showing you this histogram over and over again. You create these as you do research. You become more knowledgeable on a subject or the thing. But then you take this and you interpret what it means in the sense of the research. And so that was created, that was an experiment that was done. And then this is the story that came out, or the interpretation that came out of that histogram. Now comes time to present. Right? I said you need to bridge that audience of knowledge from you to that audience. And you're going to have to do it in a visual way. Well, we use Storyform to do that. And so if you're going to take this histogram and that story that was created and merge those two together using the Storyform method, you're going to make a story graphic out of it. And so then I can just stand here, right? If this is my talk, and say, hey, we looked at the amount of drugs in the patient's blood. One of the drugs that the patients took was taken twice a day. It never reached the effective dose. The other drug that we gave to the patients, they took it right before bedtime, And during the night, it was time released. So when they woke up in the morning, they had an effective dose, and they kept that effective dose with them throughout the day. Notice, no laser pointer. I don't have to tell you what to look at. You can do all that work on your own as an audience because the story graphic has the story embedded right in it. We've all seen these. People put these up on screen and try to walk through them with a laser pointer, right? If you make these into story graphics, you don't need a laser pointer anymore. And we also show you how to animate in these workshops or in our course that we have over the summer. So again, here's that same visual. There's those same cards. The story is in there. You just have to figure out where it is and then range it so that you can give your talk, right? So there's all the parts rearranged in the right order. But this is also too much to present to an audience at one time. And so what you need to do is animate. And so that's what we've done here. So this person would say, hey, I need to validate my research by RNA-seq. And that's going to help me identify the expression profile and the neurotransmission levels. I'm going to take those QTLs that I identified in step 1. I'm going to make a CRISPR mutant tadpole out of Xenopus. And then I'm going to end up with an unmutated half and a mutated half. I can then take those and I can run that RNA-seq on it. That's going to give me my isoforms. I could patch clamp those, and that's going to give me my neurotransmission levels. Super complex stuff, super easy to do, no laser pointer necessary. Make it into a story graphic. So I'm going to end there. What is the time? It's 2:07. So I do have time. I want to show you an example. Before I show you an example of actually someone giving a talk using this method, I want to remind you that we talked about 3-minute talks, story graphics, 10-minute talks, visuals, posters, but we also have courses that we do over the summer that you can join. Before I do questions, because I have time, let's do an example of a 3-minute talk. So here's Kavlia, right? This was the story graphic that she came up with. I'm going to have her do her 3-minute talk. And as she hits each card, the card will appear on the screen. So you'll see how those cards are used in order in her talk, but you'll also hear her talk. Let me make sure I have the sound on. And here's her talk.
Imagine if I can cure your heart disease by taking skin cells from you and then making a new heart out of it. That would be great, isn't it? Hello, I'm Kaivalya, and what I do is I can take skin cells or blood cells from your body and then convert them into something called stem cells. Stem cells are cells that have the ability to become any cell type of your body, like kidney cells, liver cells, heart cells, and so on. And this process of converting mature cells in your body, like skin cells or blood cells, into stem cells is called reprogramming. And why do we even need to do this? We do this because stem cells that we make from a patient can be converted into different healthier cell types that can basically put back into the patient to cure their disease. But the problem with this process of reprogramming is that it is very inefficient, in the sense that if I start off with like about 100 skin cells, I just get 5 stem cells. And then it becomes important for me to identify these stem cells out of these pool of different cells so that I can actually use them to cure patient diseases. And the problem with current methods that are used to identify these stem cells are that they're destructive, in the sense that I need to kill the cell to identify if it's a stem cell or not. But if I kill it, what's the point, right? I can't really use it for anything. So what our lab started asking was, is there a way to just identify stem cells without killing them? So we started staring at these stem cells, and we started staring at these skin cells that we derived them from, and then we were like, what's different? And then we were like, oh hey, the nucleus in both these cells looks different. Nucleus is a component of the cell, which is essentially a brain of the cell, kind of telling the cell what it should be doing. So we went ahead and took pictures of skin cells that were undergoing reprogramming to stem cells, and then we measured various features of this nucleus, like area, perimeter, what's the shape, what's the internuclear distance, and so on. And guess what we saw? We saw, as you can see from my slide, that stem cells had smaller and circular nucleus that were close together, while skin cells had larger and elongated nucleus that were far apart. So just based on these features of the nucleus, we could basically tell if a given cell was a stem cell or not. And the bonus was that we could also tell which stage of reprogramming these cells were in. So overall what we did was we developed a method to identify stem cells just by looking at them without killing them, so that I can actually hopefully use them for curing patient diseases. Thank you.
And so with that, I'll finish. We'll be happy to take your questions. We would also like to propose that we do these workshops for your individual campuses if you'd like, or as a national campus.
Any questions for us? No questions?
Question.
Great, thank
Sure.
you.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about theme and sort of like how to relate multiple research projects, or like in the case of a journal, how to relate multiple papers using an overarching story or sort of theme.
It would be more like a 50-minute talk kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, which we do. So it's, again, there's an overarching story that bridges off multiple questions during that story. It's a cascade of questions, as Holly would say. And you do that in the right order, then each one leads to the next one. And they build upon each other so that each one has its own success at the end, but there's also the big success of all of those adding up together.
I see.
It's
So it's sort of like a, yeah, go
in
ahead.
murder mystery, it's sort of like if and they divide up tasks in murder mysteries, and they say you take care of figuring out if this paint came from whatever, and you go interview witnesses. And then so if you have every single person's story, then they can be sort of integrated by the reader, and they can see where they're going.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
You're welcome.
I think we have a few more minutes. Any other questions?
I could throw a question out to them. So as journalists, right, one of your focus is to be in journalism. Could you see using this with the people you interview or the people you're writing stories for as a way to get audiences to understand those researchers?
I mean, I was actually thinking along similar lines, so I'll deflect the question back to you both. Do you see ways of using this in a written form, like a research article form or manuscript? And what would that look like?
Yeah, actually, Joan Jorgensen, who's here with us today, she teaches a course about how to use Storyform to write a manuscript. So, right, Joni?
Yeah, that's right. I teach a course along with Holly, and we use a lot of the same graphics to kind of match those pieces into the standard format of a manuscript. And we use a lot of the same kind of ideas where we take, starting with all the results, we have them bring each figure from their manuscript, and we throw them on the table and we help them put them in an order, and we call that storyboarding. And with the idea that the most exciting thing that really, really answers the dramatic question is the very last one that you'll put in your manuscript. And then we use the very same process of then we start with that, and then we go around and we build the beginning, like what are the characters that you need to know to understand the dramatic question and so forth. So it's the very same format, and it's just going to match up to the different sections of the manuscript.
And I've used this process in grants many times, right? So the entire abstract is this story, right, built into there. But the beginning of the grant has the story, and then the overarching story of the grant. And it just makes it so much easier. It's so much easier to get funded. And so.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some, if we could ask, are you able to share any your emails so we could ask further questions and also maybe access some of these like visual resources? They looked very helpful.
Our email is storyformscience, all one word, at gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
You bet.
And again, we would be interested in setting up workshops for all of you to come to, where you can actually do the cards yourself.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, as this breakout room is about to wrap up, yeah, obviously I'd like to thank you two for presenting. And in our exit ticket, we are, we're gonna ask like if people want to like see a continuation of this session. So please, everyone, fill that out. And hopefully we can do more of those presentations at some time in the future. So yeah. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.